Hello, everyone. Sorry I didn't come yesterday. I had a couple extra meetings come up, so I figured it was better to come now and come a little late than never. So Ephesians 5, 1 through 17 is what we walked through this past week. And it was just I don't know if you felt this, I felt like it was a really heavy text because there's some pretty explicit commands that Paul gives us and a weight and a burden that comes if you don't view this through the lens of Christ. It's just this heavy burden because none of us can ever perfectly measure up. Like this, be imitators of God, walk in love just like Jesus loved us, discern what is pleasing to the Lord, no part in unfruitful works. Walk as wise, making the best use of the time. All this stuff is just super heavy and actually impossible for us to fulfill in our own strength and in our own measuring. Which is where I think it's important that Paul starts where he does. He says, be imitators of God as beloved children. All of that comes back to that reality that it's only possible because we're beloved children of God, because God has adopted us and made us a family now. And as I talked on Sunday, it's the difference between being and doing. So we can be children of God. That is a static fact that cannot and will not change. And then out of that comes the doing, the being imitators piece. Those two things are intimately connected to each other. We also talked a lot about sex and sexual immorality, and especially in the current cultural time that we find ourselves in. I think it's important for us to be willing to engage about and dialogue about sex in some different ways. So I just wanted to talk a little bit further about that idea. And I think some of what we need to do is we need to have a recovery of a better story of sex. I was talking to someone last night about some of those realities too, where like it's a difficult mental shift where when you're growing up, all you hear is sex is bad, bad, bad. And then when you get married, suddenly it goes from bad, bad, bad to good, good, good. So you're supposed to just expected like in one night to turn a switch. And so it's at times hard to process and make that adjustment from being single to suddenly being married. And I think we need to find a better way to talk about and engage the issue of sex, because at the beginning, sex was a beautiful creation from God given to us to help us understand His nature. Now let me unpack that just a little bit. Sex was actually a part of God's good creation. So all throughout Genesis 1, even when He creates man and women, He says it is very good. And so He didn't create Adam and Eve, stumble across them having sex and go, whoa, what are you guys doing? Stop that. No, that was His means that He chose to expand His ordering through creation. And since the fall, Satan has attempted to destroy that beautiful gift, that beautiful union. Think of all the barren wombs that you read through the Old Testament in Jesus' lineage. That is not incidental and that is not accidental. Satan was trying to stop the seed of the woman crushing the seed of the serpent. And so he's doing that by attacking the womb and attacking specifically sex. Because sex was a beautiful gift from God that is intended to image and represent His perfect union and perfect nature, that is what Satan most often tries to attack. And some of that means that sex actually serves as a visible demonstration to us of the perfect union between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, Tim Keller, in his book, The Meaning of Marriage, dedicates an entire book to this idea of sex. I'm going to read just the last summary where he talks about that exact idea. He says, sex is glorious. We would know that even if we didn't have the Bible. Sex leads us to words of adoration. It literally evokes shouts of joy and praise. Through the Bible, we know why this is true. John 17 tells us that from all eternity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have been adoring and glorifying each other, living in high devotion to each other, pouring love and joy into one another's hearts continually. Sex between a man and a woman points to the love between the Father and the Son. It is a reflection of the joyous self-giving and pleasure of love within the very life of the triune God. Sex is glorious, not only because it reflects the joy of the Trinity, but also because it points to the eternal delight of souls that we will have in heaven, and our loving relationships with God and one another. Romans 7:1 and following tells us that the best marriages are pointers to the deep, infinitely fulfilling, and final union we will have with Christ in love. No wonder, as some have said, that sex between a man and a woman can be a sort of embodied, out-of-body experience. It's the most ecstatic, breathtaking, daring, scarcely to be imagined look at the glory that is our future. Now, some of this is getting to the reality that we need a more holistic view of sex and a more holistic view of the body. I think that the single biggest issue we as Christians need more training on today is theological anthropology. That is, humanity created in the image of God. What does it mean that we are created in the image of God? Again, our bodies are not an accident. Like God is creating everything, stirring everything up, and then whoops, here comes a body. In fact, you may not even realize this. Paul talks about in if we die before Christ comes back, this separation that we'll have where our souls are separated from our body will make us long for the final return where our souls will finally be reunited again. This is referring to a theological idea known as the intermediate state. I'll post a couple links to it in the email and the description of this video if you want to do more research on that. But when we die, it's not like everything is finally done. Our soul will go to be with heaven. So Paul talks about to be absent with the body is to be present with the Lord. But our body is not incidental to who we are. So we will not be completed until Jesus finally returns and our souls and our bodies are reunited together once again. We also need to admit and realize sex and marriage is meant to serve as a picture of a future union that we will have when Jesus finally does return. And that longing that we should have in the midst of that is something our single friends actually understand much better and much better that angst of that longing than those of us who are married. That's where we need each other within the context of a church to remind each other that marriage is not ultimate. That's where, like when Jesus is asked from the Pharisees or the Sadducees, what about someone who's married and then he dies, so his wife has to marry his brother and so on and so forth. Who will she be married to in the last day? And all the single friends read something like that and they go, that is a stupid thing to be asking, because marriage is meant to serve as a picture, which is why we won't have marriage between humans in heaven, because our ultimate marriage is to Jesus Christ. That's where even like I've been reading or listening to a podcast that I will as well link to this, where someone's been working through a book called Theology of the Body for Beginners, Rediscovering the Meaning of Life, Love, Sex, and Gender. So Saint John Paul II, the Roman Catholic Pope, did his entire magnum opus on theology of the body, and argued that we need to have a recovery of the erotic love within Christianity. Because if God is love, then even the erotic love is something that is true and descriptive of who he is. That's where sex, again, is meant to serve as a picture of who and what God is like. If you want more information about that, I would recommend this book, or I'll link to the podcast below as well. It was just a fascinating look for me at the need for us to recover a more holistic approach to who God is. A couple others that were helpful for me, Greg Allison's Embodied, Living as Whole People in a Fractured World. He has a chapter in here on sex as well. This one, Sam Allberry, How the Gospel is Good News for Our Physical Selves. The main title, that was the subtitle, is What God Has to Say About Our Bodies. Sam Allberry is really helpful as well. You should look up, he at one point spoke to Parliament or a Council of Elders. He is a Anglican pastor in London. He's British. He's also same-sex attracted, yet is living a celibate lifestyle, which I think is applaudable. And he's someone that serves as an example of that longing for the union that we will finally have when we get to heaven. So this is a whole lot bigger than I have time to dissect or distill down for you today. If you want to talk further, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll buy you a cup of coffee and we can sit down and chat through some of what this means and the implications for that. But just want to touch on that briefly once again. This sexual immorality, all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, which means we must be demonstrating our sexual morality and purity and not covetousness. Like we need to be above reproach in the ways that we engage sex in our lives today. Again, I just want to also reiterate, if you have a broken sexual past, which most people do, bring that into the light, expose that, be willing to share that with other people who can then help you walk through and navigate whatever issues or difficulties you are walking through in your life. A couple other notes in here. He talks at one point about these empty words, verse 6, let no one deceive you with empty words. I just want to remind you, be careful who you listen to, be careful what authors you're reading. There are a lot of people out there that are trying to deceive. If you want, if you're looking for help or a book on a specific topic, I have a lot behind me. I really enjoy reading and try to read as broadly as I can and try to help us curate our own libraries and our own things that we are digesting, because it does shape us in some specific directions. And I want the things that we are reading to be shaping and forming us into the as we see here, to be imitators of God. The last thing, towards the end, verse 16, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. We as staff spent some time talking through some of the discipleship pieces yesterday. Like what is it to help us become more intentional about our new mission statement, making and maturing disciples of Jesus. And one of the biggest things that came out of that is asking the question, where are your priorities? Because if you look around at the modern landscape today, is church tends to be the last thing added and then the first thing taken out. So someone gets tired on the weekend, like it becomes heavy or something comes up. Generally, church is the first thing to go, so they can either sleep in or go do whatever else they were putting off for the rest of the weekend. And I was also listening to there's a new podcast that is solely being released by Trevin Wax right now called Reconstructing Faith that is really helpful. But he was looking at this past one was looking at the negative effects of social media and the internet in our lives today. And the average American average American adult spends 2.5 hours every single day on social media. 2.5 hours every day. If you come here on a Sunday morning for both the Equip Hour and for our worship services, that's about 2.5 hours. Sorry, worship service singular. That is about 2.5 hours. And so if you like factor in the things that are pouring into and speaking into your life, you have 7 times the amount of social media that is speaking to you versus the church that is speaking into you. So why is it that most humans, I'm not saying you specifically, but most humans, adult humans in the United States today, have that much priority given to social media and that little priority given to the church? And I just want to remind us that the only thing that is guaranteed to last until Jesus comes back is the church. Jesus guaranteed that the church would never fade away. So like in that vein, this priority, what are your priorities? There's a book that came out a couple of years ago that is really helpful called The Common Rule, Habits of Purpose for an Age of Distraction by Justin Earley. He wrote a follow-up, The Common Rule for Families, that Kara has at our house right now. But he just found himself like overworked, overeating, overstressed, all these different kinds of things. And he realized his priorities were out of whack and needed some way of bringing them back together. And he found one of the best ways to do that is by doing it within a group of like-minded people. So doing it with the church. So some of what God has called and commanded us to do is to be intentional with all that we do. Have our priorities correct, where it is God above any and everything else. Like I say goodbye to my family every morning. Yesterday morning, I was saying goodbye and giving everyone kisses, and then I got to Kara and I said, "And I love you the most." And Calvin started crying because he said, "Well, why do you love her the most?" And Kara wisely replied, "He loves me the most so that he can love you the best he can." And if our priorities get out of whack like that, like if our kids become the higher priority than our marriage, then we're going to run into major issues in our lives. Similarly, if our family becomes a higher priority than the church, then we're going to run into issues at some point in our future as well. Now, all that to say as well, making the best use of the time, all of us are limited by time. Like time, we can't get it back. It is not a renewable resource, which means we should be using our time wisely and carefully. And some of that is even figuring out how has God uniquely equipped and gifted and wired you. Like what is it that makes you unique, and what is it that you can contribute to the needs of the body, the thing that you alone can best do for us as God's people in this local manifestation of Christ's kingdom on earth. So that's Ephesians 5, 1 through 17. Again, if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to me. We'd love to sit down and chat with you. And as I mentioned on Sunday, I'm going to be like doing the next couple sections out of order a little bit. So this coming Sunday, because it's Family Sunday, I'm going to be doing Ephesians 6, 1 through 9, I believe, which is the children obey your parents in the Lord. And then we'll come back to the marriage piece the week after that. And we're getting close to finishing up Ephesians. It's been a wonderful series. If there's been anything else that has stood out to you, I'd love to hear it. Things that maybe you've learned, been challenged in, stood out to you differently maybe this time than what you had read through before. It's been fun for me. The thing that has stood out to me most thus far is this in love, like that idea in love. I'd missed that as I'd read through Ephesians before, and so I feel like it has stood out. Like every text, it almost feels like there's this theme and emphasis of walking in love. So we'll be Ephesians 6, 1 through 9. Sunday is Family Sunday, and I'm looking forward to continuing and finishing up soon this series with you.